So I have the pleasure of knowing a lot of you, and some of you are new, and so it's lovely to see you all here. Happy New Year for those of you who, well, actually, I'll do save my introduction for a little bit down the road here, but today I wanted to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about the concept of storytelling for knowledge translation, but from kind of both lenses. Now, for myself, I can say I come from um, the stakeholder side as a former caregiver, and that's where I got my start. And I have noticed a few things about the current state of how we utilize storytelling, but also utilizing my knowledge mobilization hat. I've done a little digging, have had some experiences. I wanted to share some reflections, but also some considerations as well too. But I also wanted to talk about this from in the context of there's always so much more to learn. It's never like we have come to achieve like this is the only way we do this. This is it. There is no other practice available. So I wanted to have an opportunity to have a conversation about what your experiences are, what may be any knowledge gaps that may be still considerable, things like that, and maybe there's opportunities for collaboration in the future. So there's space for everybody to kind of find um support in any context with this as well too. So the reason we offer these brief talks during the day is I'm a part of the Family Engagement and Research Course Training Program. And what that does essentially is it's a 10-week course for researchers as well as people with lived experience to come together to be trained in the processes of creating healthy partnerships in patient engagement or family engagement and patient-oriented research. And so let's dig into the conversation a little bit here today. First, I want to take an opportunity to acknowledge where I have the privilege of living, working, and playing in Treaty 7 territory here in Calgary, Alberta. I am continuing to learn as best I can about the processes that bring people to understand the necessities of land acknowledgements and learning about the history of Alberta from an Indigenous lens as well too. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Ray Martins. I am a knowledge broker, as I mentioned, with Kids Brain Health Network and CanChild. And as of recently, the addition of University of Calgary as well too. I work as well part-time as a health science student. I am a former caregiver, 2 times cancer survivor. So I've had storytelling experiences from a variety of lenses, both as a caregiver, but also as a patient myself. My lens of the areas of focus that I have professionally speaking are in knowledge mobilization, um, healthy relationships in family engagement and partnerships, health policy, human rights, but also Canadian healthcare reform as well. So this is an opportunity to share some reflections, but also I wanted this to be a space where we can have some conversations about the current status of utilizing storytelling in knowledge translation, but also to consider, as I mentioned as well, the notion that there may be knowledge gaps where there could be potential aspects of collaboration, things like that. So why we are here, well, this is kind of a basic rundown as to some of the things that I hope to cover today, a brief introduction to storytelling and knowledge translation and how they intersect. A framework that actually came out this year that's been published utilizing storytelling as an intervention, or for those of you who are partners who are not used to the vernacular of intervention, it's basically a process of helping people to be informed or to have some sort of behavior change, to facilitate, and also to talk about how to facilitate planning processes with your partners as well too. And then obviously we'll have some discussion. This was a quote that kind of really spoke to me when it came to looking into this, and that is, when we speak our story, we are making meaning of our lives, and we find connection with other stories as well too. For me, I've found that there's been an opportunity to I've had many opportunities to be very uniquely vulnerable, and in some cases that has gone very well, and in some cases I've had some very terrible experiences sharing my story as well too. And anything that can help create spaces for success, not only from the science of behavior change or creating awareness, but also for psychological safety for the storyteller, the better we are at this practice as well. So as some of you this may be new to some of you, these are some of the benefits that come from utilizing storytelling in this context. Things like education and awareness, for personal reflection, where everyone can stop and really think about uh, about how this applies to the work that is going on, things like that. And in this case as well too, I know some people utilize storytelling in the context as an opportunity to create a pause in meetings and things like that. I wanted to share one aspect that is not necessarily storyteller centered care, is when you have a story in a meeting and you move directly to the next thing on the docket afterwards with no pause, no opportunity for reflection, no opportunity for conversation. You have immediately talked about one person's bearing of their soul to suddenly jumping into talking about grant proposals. That's just cold. Please don't do that. Sometimes it can be worth it when it comes to building a social movement, policy advocacy, and that's actually the one experience that I want to talk about today. And I want to dissect some of the aspects of how that worked in my particular case, but also in research and evaluation as well too. Now, when it comes to partners, there is something to be said about the benefit as well too, about how mentorship factors into this as well too. We talk about the storytelling as a process. We talk about it being an emotional experience, but I think sometimes as well too, this can be, it is worth considering where a person is in terms of their overall awareness of research in general. From a lot of lenses, being there's not a lot in the literature that talks about the processes a person goes through when it comes to being a partner in research or in engagement processes. And one of the things that I have firmly come to understand is that there is a point of discovery where people say, oh, I can be in these spaces, I belong in these healthcare spaces, to being fully engaged and fully embedded in healthcare systems. And then there's a lot of opportunity for different experiences to happen in between. So depending on where they're at, it can be a really great mentorship opportunity to help people understand that their story is their story, but also within the context of knowledge translation, that, hey, if these are some of the key points that represent some of the work that we are doing right now. Is there anything within your story that reflects some of these points as common themes and things like that? So these are just a few ways that can help people understand the purpose, not just of storytelling and occupying this space. There's not always a real sense of awareness as to the purpose behind it. And so when you can help people see where this fits in the broader picture, that helps them to understand that their participation really matters in this context. We've had with our team as well too, a really interesting conversation in recent weeks about improving and better understanding a person's sense of belonging in these spaces. And I think that storytelling really factors in here as being a real primary entry point for a lot of people in terms of where they have that opportunity to partner. So for myself, this is, and a little bit of background, this is actually at a library at New York University in New York City. In 2018, I was offered an opportunity to attend COSP, which is the Conference on the States Parties on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And this was at the United Nations. This was my first opportunity to obviously occupy a space like that. And I joke a lot of times when I talk about this experience that it felt like being called up to the Avengers. No one has, no one can fully prepare for this. And I will say that, and this is a conversation for another day when it comes to human rights and disability rights, we do not have a really robust sense of awareness as to how that is defined in many spaces. and it took me a little bit to figure out how I can use my story in this space, other than the fact that I was going through a humongous amount of imposter syndrome, feeling like I could occupy this space, and a lot of the people that were in this room as well too, um, were delegates from literally all over the world, as well as the at the time the federal disability minister in Canada, Kirsty Duncan, who was there. So what I ended up doing was talking to some of my colleagues at Kids Brain Health Network and a few people who were focused specifically on policy, and said, so if you had an opportunity to be in this space, what would you want to talk about? What would you want to convey? And it was really lovely to be able to ask that. And I will say that not everybody has that sense of awareness to be able to ask that. And that's something that you might need to share with people as well too, that that's okay to say these things, because and to provide a little bit of guidance with that. And in a Starbucks somewhere in Manhattan, I wrote out exactly what my talk was all about. And one of the pieces that came at the end was talking about how so what we were essentially doing, I never realized, I didn't mention what we were supporting a policy paper on human rights-based approaches to childhood disability policy. And within this space, I talked about, I want every child deserves a full life, no matter how long or short it is. And within that context, I reflected on what it meant to have successes. And there's a video of my son. He did not care for the movie Moana, with the exception of one song, the song How Far I'll Go. And he would listen to that with great frequency, to a point where if he would try to make eye contact with you and say, are you paying attention? Because if you're not paying attention, you're a heartless individual. And he would pinch you to make sure that you were paying attention and things like that. So it was a space where he was sitting with my husband, and they were just looking at each other, or sometimes he'd pull his face in and be like, look at me, this is wonderful, we're sharing this together. And to me, that reflected not just a beautiful moment, but a lot of hard work that got to that point. And that moment was something that truly reflected what I wanted to see in sharing my story, in reflecting what the work that was happening. And so I wanted to kind of share a bit of a chart as to what the overlap of some of the points that were shared versus my story. So one of the technical reasons that I spoke about was that health models exist that can help talk about the framing development of disability related policies, things like the World Health Organization's framework on health and functioning, the ICF. And then from there, I shared stories of utilizing those anecdotes about something called the F words, which is something that in childhood disability, which is some work that was done by CanChild, and really helps people understand that friends and family and function and future are all really important factors for families in terms of child development and how they make the choices through raising their kids. Another one was that disabled children are deserving of human rights. And that's where I shared the story about Moana, and that reaching his potential was so a wonderful experience for us. That current approaches to policy have been really siloed and inconsistent. And from there, I talked about the fiery hoops that a lot of us families have to walk through in order to get anything done and to feel supported. And of course, the fact that children deserve full lives, and all of that played into how our story was shared as well too. Now, it's really important to consider as well too that there are ethical considerations when it comes to sharing stories, that consent is an ongoing conversation. The reason for that being is that sometimes there are significant changes that can come within people's lives, and especially in the demographic of families that we work with as well too. And to really communicate openly that is an important conversation to have. Supporting the well-being of the storyteller as well too. One important factor that I can talk about as well too when it comes to well-being, that I didn't even know was a problem until it happened, was actually a few weeks ago. I was out in Ottawa at a health conference, sharing my story for the first time, and I have been recovering finding my own quality of life after a lot of significant struggles with post-traumatic stress. And as I mentioned, I'm okay with being someone who is emotional. If I cry, like, no big deal. I tell that to families all the time. If you cry in a hospital, it's okay. You're not the first person to do that. You don't need to be apologetic about it. You won't be the last person to cry in a hospital. But at the same point as well, too, after doing so, and this is something I'm very used to, is talking about these things. I was completely physically leveled for 2 days afterwards. I didn't realize that I had that capacity for that to happen. But it is something that we definitely need to be aware of, that in some cases we need to create room for breaks, for overall all well-being, but to have a conversation about this at the same time. Um, there needs to be a clear understanding as well too, in terms of who owns that story and where it can be shared as well too. And in some cases, I think we need to be a little bit open to the idea that of asking ourselves in professional spaces, are we gatekeeping the ownership of this, or is there spaces where people can use these stories as well too, where there would be a great benefit? And in some cases, um, and I've noticed this a little bit. I'm going to talk a little bit about during COVID and end of Project KT, and how that has really shared some personal frustrations as well too, about how if we're not offering those spaces for people who are in advocacy spaces right now, to utilize some of these products, that and then sometimes we really need to think about, well, are we going to be creating meaningful change with knowledge translation if we can't even offer people an opportunity to access this information? And obviously, it's really important to do things like ensuring relevance, making sure that decision making from an ethics standpoint is an ongoing process as well too, and creating an agreed upon plan for distribution that involves the storyteller. All of these things really are important considerations here in this context. And my laptop's being a little weird about changing things around. So this is a framework that I came across that actually came out this year, and I wanted to talk a little bit about. Now, this is about from a behavior change process, but I think that it actually has application in a lot of other areas as well too, and really helps to think about the process from a broader view. So you can see the DIY on the bottom there, and I'd be happy actually to post that. Oh, I'd be happy to share that as well too through Eventbrite if people want a copy of the paper. But as things start with this is it starts here from ensuring the form of knowledge translation matches the function of what you're planning to do. Articulating the goals that are associated with what sort of change or sense of awareness that you want to see. What are the mechanisms that help create the effective goal that you want to have? Choosing the behavior change and what is the catalyst to create that technique. Techniques will dictate the best mode of delivery, with delivery mode in mind, crafting your script and moving forward all the way towards evaluation. I think there's a lot to be said about really taking a harder look at this and seeing where it's not just look, we made a story, the end. What are the values of the people that you are looking to support with the storytelling, and how can we see this as being how can we give this the important weight that it deserves in whatever work that you're doing here as well too. So when it comes to the theory phase, it's important to check out and have conversations about behavior change and awareness, what sort of function you want from the process as well too. Developing a theoretical understanding of, so if you've never heard the phrase mechanisms of action, they use it a lot in medicine when it comes to whatever sort of medication that you take. There is a mechanism of action that moves things forward through the body. The same thing can be said about behavior change or any sort of interventions or events that, like storytelling. What do you want it to do, and what should it do, and what does it do? These are all really important questions to ask here. Modeling. So this is a phase where you can consider what a logic model looks like. A logic model is a term from implementation science, understanding how do you want people to walk through understanding a certain thing goal that you have in mind. So that's picking the mode of how you want to tell the story. Um, and I think storytelling comes from a broader range than what we give it credit for. There's digital storytelling from using photography slides. There is just having someone tell their story. There's podcasts. There's a number of different versions of what can be done. Um, Considering whether there is as well a need for evaluation. Sometimes it can even be creating stories that are an amalgamation of a bunch of experiences as well too, is another potential modality there too. And so who is going to deliver it and how will it be delivered is another, and whether or not you have funding. I think sometimes I wanted to share that, while there are many things where you might have the budget for creating the storytelling processes, but in some cases there are routes that you can take that might not necessarily put a dent in your wallet, or proverbial wallet per se. These are some of the tools that I have used in the past when it comes to creating movies. I'm a big fan of iMovie on Mac. You can also get it on iPhone as well too. It's fairly user friendly. There's a lot of really great videos on YouTube as to all of the things that you can use for it. Canva has some really great ways where it's just kind of a drop down thing to add slides or video files along the way, and you can add audio clips as well. And if you're looking for video clips that won't set you back from a stock video standpoint, Pexels is one of my favorite as well too. They have a lot of free stock videos, which are just 10-second clips from a variety of themes. And if you work in the field of disability, um, disability stock footage has a reputation of being very few and far between, and if not, it can be very expensive. I have found new faces, and it's not just the same little boy in every website. In this case, there's actually a lot more available there. Another way to utilize is GarageBand. It's a great way if you have interest in creating a podcast. You can actually do it from your phone as well too, and create audio files. Those audio files can be used for podcasts. They can be the recordings for the clips that you want to do for movies, things like that. And there's also a lot of phone-based technology as well too. TikTok can be one great thing, but the one thing that I will mention with that is if you want to utilize it as an account, you need to have the intention of creating stories for knowledge translation with consistent, excuse me, amount of posting. But you can also just utilize your account solely for just doing the recording and then just deleting the video afterwards. And then you have a fully produced recording that you can use. And there are other apps as well too, like CapCut, that is definitely an option as well too. Now, if you do feel like there's an importance for creating an evaluation in this case, these are some of the tools that can be important in considerations in terms of what sort of evaluation you craft as well. Understanding whether or not it was effective, does it drive the point across, or is it just making people feel good? Is it following your goals and things like that, as well as cost effectiveness? Now, when it comes to pandemic considerations for partnering with people, there's two aspects that I wanted to talk about here in terms of how I don't think it's been really challenging to convey the impact the pandemic has had on a lot of people, especially marginalized populations of people, and the stresses involved with that. And when we create assumptions, that sometimes doesn't necessarily create healthy spaces to do story sharing, because that adds a lot of work onto people who are already overly taxed to begin with. And so sometimes in terms of having honest assessments along the way, if you go to canchild.ca and look at the family engagement research course, we have a lot of knowledge translation tools that can help sort of keep yourself in check, excuse me, with some of the with some of the partnership goals that you may have in mind as well too. But these are a few thoughts that I've had from a COVID related lens that I thought were really important. One is to have an honest discussion with your partners about the work of disseminating or move it around. Don't assume that they're going to do the work for you. In some cases, it's if it's meant, for example, to create significant system change, then to assume that people are already taxed are going to do the labor, that's not creating a sustainable understanding of what needs to happen in this case. Another aspect as well too that can be if they if this is from an advocacy standpoint, consider maybe adding things like taking some time to create a brief policy brief about the research that you're doing, where they have an opportunity to describe this with greater language that they might not necessarily have themselves, and in a way that they can share this with policymakers as well too. And in terms of next steps and things that might be help understand what makes your project sustainable is, will this be easily found by the people that you are looking to support? Where is the best place to house it? There is definitely something to be said about one video channel over another. Everybody is at YouTube, for example. Then why consider other places to go and things like that? Will there be a need to potentially revisit what you've created and do an updated version of it, or to do something else involved with that as well too? Sorry, just a moment here. And these are some potential places as well to consider when it comes to resources. Story Center is quite a large organization that has been doing this for quite some time with researchers. Another one whom I know some of you are very familiar with is Mike Lang Stories, who does this from a lot from a caregiver standpoint, but does a lot of healthcare related stuff as well too. We did some work with him through talking about youth and mental health during COVID, and they did a wonderful job with the work as well too. And thank you. I just I wanted to take this opportunity to really open this up for discussion and kind of see, were there any thoughts, questions about what was shared here today? Versus what you're doing, whether or not you are a partner, what space you occupy here, any further questions or many gaps that we're working on as well too. But Kate.
Hi, Rachel.
Hello.
Okay, so I'm starting the process in my new position where they really want me to be the unicorn, as it's always put, of I have the lived experience as well as the academic and research experience. So they want me to combine the two worlds and tell my story. Up until this point, when I've told my story, and we know each other personally, so we've talked about my story, I tend to do like what I call the squirrely. And because there's so much information and so many things I want to say, and I'm so incredibly passionate about it, it will be like 4 o'clock in the morning and I'll realize I didn't complete like any of my sentences. How do you, or what is like some guidance that you can give us? Like, how do you organize your thoughts? How do you condense? How do you make it the most impactful that you're not rambling on and then crying hysterically for an hour? You know what I mean? I just don't know how to do
that. Well, I think to start off with, it's really important to understand who's in the room and what purpose you're there for to begin with, and to think about your story from not just a beginning, a middle, and end. I think I like to think about 4 points that I want to convey. If it's like, say, like, and that can be something from an hour to a 5-minute story share. Either way, it works. But what helps me to guide, because I can be quite the rambler as well too. But what helps me to do is to picture a scene where that I want to help to make a start to it. What's the thing that helps people to imagine in their minds where you're trying to take them. What's the first driving factor that maybe frustrates you, or that you want to convey as a celebration piece, or whatever the goals may be. Each 4 points have a message in mind, and what ends up happening when you create those 4 points, you start to contextualize how you walk people through what you want to convey with that as well too. um and sometimes that comes with practice as well too. I, for many years, was not the best storyteller in the world, and I was very much glued to cue cards in order to convey the points that I wanted to share. And I don't know, something clicked, but what ended up happening was PowerPoint actually helped me out a lot. And it seemed like every picture that I could put, and this is my neurodivergent brain kicking in here as well too, is that helped me to describe what my intention was initially, and kind of be little benchmarks to know that I was hitting the things that I wanted to come across as well too. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the PowerPoint thing is a really great idea, just to continue looking at it and making sure I'm hitting my point. I think like the issue is that many of us have such a long story, right? Like how did we become who we are, like personally, without our child's disability?
Hmm. No, that makes total sense. And I think that thing evolves too. And there's something to be said about sort of making some peace with that as well too, is that um you can only communicate where your heart and your mind is at in the moment. um from 5 years later, you might look at that and go, wow, that's not how I feel right now. But that's just the evolving nature of being human as well too. So if there is a goal in mind as to what you're trying to convey to people, common themes helps to kind of drive that home. And if your story in between changes, these help being kind of the guiding points that push you in the right direction, and keep you anchored without heading out on some ginormous tangent or something to that effect. But also, just to really be kind to yourself, and understanding that, yeah, you can only convey who you are in the now, and what you've reflected on. So there's something to be said about coming at that with a comfort and confidence, and understanding that that's okay. And Christina mentions here, one thing I've learned was to be mindful of the one experience that will impact the audience the most. A brief intro, whatever brief means. Yeah. And then talk about the one chapter at a time. And that's exactly it. Is in some cases, it really has been about talking about the honest breaks that happen in life, and the things that really have left you that puddle in the floor. But much like we say in life, don't sit in that forever either. You want to, if you can bring people through key points, and have them share the impact and the depths of the things that you felt, but also bring them to a point of what you wish to see in yourself, or in the goal, and help them understand that that there's potential in this, to make sure that nobody else has to feel that way. There's a lot of variability in that, but it sometimes it's those anchor points that really help to frame it. And actually, as over time, you actually find that you get better at doing that as well too. Sometimes I grew up old school church background, and one of the things, there's the old phrase about having a sermon in your back pocket. If you're someone who frequently tells your story, it can be good to practice it and have thoughts in mind as to how to do like a 3-minute version, 5-minute version, and what you would want to talk about if you had a half hour. That not that you necessarily have to have that script in your mind constantly, be constantly rehearsing. But when you kind of keep that in mind, it helps you to kind of consider what creates the Reader's Digest version versus the ongoing novel series that you're writing in your mind, and things like that, and what would be necessary in either context. Christina.
Okay.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. So I have a question about using storytelling for KT.
Mhm.
So where are they doing this in the real world? Who's interested in using storytelling as knowledge translation? I mean, other than us, who with the lived experience. I mean, are you finding that certain types of organizations or certain areas of, say, healthcare, or certain types of researchers are like, hey, we want to use this. This is a valid way of sharing information. Because I feel like there's a very set niche of people who are happy to use storytelling, and then others are like, well, that's too wishy-washy for us. So
Mhm.
you tell.
Well, I think to some measure on the wishy-washy side, sometimes people are not well versed in understanding. Oh, not to worry, Lisa. I can also I'll send the recording as well too on the Eventbrite site, so you can have access to that as well too, for anything that you may have missed. Um, but when it comes to the wishy-washy side, it can be sometimes worth figuring out whether or not it is worth advocating in that context. Not everybody, if that's not everybody's skill set. Um, Scientists and researchers, traditionally speaking, um, love the knowledge piece, but sometimes the not everyone is gifted with the creativity side of that, and sometimes that comes with um, further training and offering those opportunities for training. And that's, for example, like one great reason why Mike Lang does what he does, because that's that formal opportunity to be that creative person. Or the Sue Robbins of the world who, and if you Google Sue Robbins, that is another option as well too, when it comes to creating stories and help to learn about the skill sets of writing is another option as well too. So when you have those resources, sometimes it can be about advocating in those spaces and helping people find those resources for them. But in some cases, when it comes to the people who are doing this actively right now, do this for a variety of reasons. For example, at the University of Calgary here, they recently had a film festival for disabled youth. And yeah, yeah, a brilliant, brilliant opportunity for people to share in that context. Or perhaps, Christine, would you be willing to share your caregivers in the wild? Or just
Yeah.
what happened with that and what the purpose was behind it?
So this is where I sort of get. I don't know how we can transition this into storytelling, but I think Mike, he's got the formula down really well. So I took a digital storytelling course with Mike back in February, and then in March he called me and said, "Hey, we're doing this fun." Um, eh, Fun YouTube series thing that hopefully will get funded, called Caregivers in the Wild. So he had gathered just from his network all different types of caregivers, and then he, you know, all expenses paid, will take you out to this random place in BC or Alberta, and sort of put you in nature for a couple of days, and then just to sort of center yourself physically, and then he'll put you in a place that makes you a little bit vulnerable. So for me, it was horseback riding. Never been on horses before, and up in the boonies in Fernie. Um, but because of that, because of that environment, because of the encouragement, Mike was able to like help me tell all sorts of different parts of my journey as a caregiver. Um, and he, although we talked about he said there was like 8 hours worth of film that we could have used, because caregiving is so all encompassing, and there's so many things that you can share as a caregiver, um, that is relevant in different places. But this is what, like, he had to bring it down to one chapter. You have to bring it down to that one thing. So the message that we chose was just, letting it go, just, being in that moment, and having recognizing the loss of control, but still the control that you have within yourself. So I didn't do any of that really. I yapped, and he put it together as a story, and it was really successful. But like one of those types of situations, I find like that seems to be like that's almost a unicorn thing. So if they could do those types of storytelling and through media and whatever, but in places where they really need to hear the stories, not just on YouTube or not just within healthcare, put it out somewhere that's going to make an impact, but not become just a commercial, right? So this
Absolutely. And
yeah.
that's actually a really great platform to talk about, where the dynamic nature of sometimes storytelling, and sometimes, and like Mike stuff's very high, like high quality film and things like that, is that and when you think about the use of stories, you think, but caregiving is enjoying quite a significant policy attention in Canada right now, especially with the creation of the National Center for Caregiving Excellence, I believe they're called. And they have moved as far as connecting with a lot of government, like they have a very much a policy focus, where caregiving, given the fact that it is something that we all literally end up doing at one point or another in our lives, it's an opportunity for normalization. And sometimes just being a resource that can be somewhere, people love that the dynamic nature of those things. When people put dynamic knowledge out in the world, like I am, for example, I love Hank Green as a science communicator. I think he is a giant geek, but I found it for him, the way he tells stuff is so completely simplified that it helps to contextualize, in really important subjects. And he was a part of my cell physiology class recently. He was, talking about the nature and the dynamic anatomy of a cell, and that made it more fun to see those sometimes there's unexpected applications, but sometimes there's very intentional applications as well too. So there's a lot of variability in terms of where it excuse me, where it is used and how it is used. And I have a terrible tickle today, my apologies. But at the same point as well too, I think there's much the imagination that's still left there as well too. Diane.
Hi, I just wanted to, as a researcher, to kind of talk to some of what Christina was asking about, is how, as researchers, are we using stories and things? And having been at McMaster for a long time, they would often start articles and things with clinical scenarios, which is sort of like a storytelling. It's a certain form of storytelling, but it was a way to draw the audience in very early about why what you're going to talk about is important. It often allowed you to reflect more on the family issues, even if it's a medical intervention or something. They give you a picture of the whole family and then work forward. So I think the beginning of storytelling back then was showing how important it was. And so I think now more and more, as families are brave enough and um, uh, kind enough to share those stories, I really feel researchers understand how impactful it is. And I know, writing grants, writing articles, doing speeches, bringing in that component really draws home the messages for at least the academic crowd. It makes it so real and so important. And yeah, I just, as a researcher, want to thank parents who become vulnerable and do share that, because it really does impact a story. And I also wanted to kind of just ask Ray, because you said you've had some not great experiences sharing your story, and you talked about about not feeling comfortable or safe, and you talked about giving your story and then having them move on to some other agenda item. I guess I'm wondering if there's any more reflection from you or anyone else about other ways to support families to share their stories. Is it before a meeting? Is it during the meeting, after the meeting? Like what would be most helpful?
I think to in a meeting context, there's an important thing to leave space for conversation and not just like, gee, thanks, bud, that was awesome. Um, but more along the lines of, um, wow, that sounds like a lot that you went through. Um, what, tell me more about this. Like to offer like 5 minutes to just really ask a simple question helps
To
people
say, I
feel
hear you and I empathize.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's deeper listening really
Yes,
being
of
the big
course.
part of it as well too. And I also I just want to say as an aside, Diane, thank you for bringing that up because I think that brings me to an excellent point that we are sharing the work of Marilyn Wright for our research rounds coming up as well too. I'm going to be putting that out to the internet world very soon. But her work in scootering was a great example of something that where there's video abstracts is another application as well in terms of storytelling. So if you read it, if you are a partner here in the room here today, there we have, if you read an abstract on a study, it's the little introductory, like short overview of whatever published work that you're reading that kind of is um like an abridged version of what they're trying to say, and then you scroll down further and then you see all the charts and the details as to what's important about the science. Now the work in this context was an informal study, but one that was very important because they saw with the kids that they were working with that there were certain muscle groups that needed to be worked, and that scootering was the thing that was a really great potential solution. And with that in mind, it's one thing to read it, but it's also another thing to see it and to see kids having fun. I've seen that as well too from some work that's being done at the UFC here with robotic based walkers for kids with cerebral palsy. And just to see a kid, just moving the leg, just, rocking down the sidewalk, doing living their best lives. That means so much more than a whole bunch of text. But it also can just be complimentary in many ways as to what they said. Like, look, see, this is fun. Or, another one could be, despite what you may think about what you read, this video conveys the fact that patients and families feel this is important, and this is why. Pay attention. All of those things can be potential applications as well too, Christina, just from referencing your question here. And frankly, Diane and Christina, you two need to hang out. I think you would be lovely. You would have a lovely conversation in the future, but that's for another day. But in last bit of a reflection of what you were mentioning, Diane, I think that what was really wonderful about the experience that I mentioned about where I had the meltdown and I was leveled for 2 days was I had friends who checked in on me and said, do you need space afterwards? And what we ended up doing was planning that event was we planned an option where I could still hang out and be in the room and be a contributor to the work we were doing. And then there was option B where I needed to go take a space, go take a nap, go wash my face, whatever the case may be. In either direction, everyone was like, this is what's going to happen, and this is lifting a person up. And that in and of itself was just so completely meaningful, because that means that you're just being seen, not for filling some sort of obligatory space, but also caring for the person who just bared their soul. And that's really what it all boils down to, I think, is in every case when it comes to when it's done well, you feel heard and you feel that sense of belonging are kind of the two main themes with a lot of when it goes well. And Christina.
I'm sorry. I just have to say though, I think it was you that taught me, Ray, was that whoever is in the audience and gets to hear your story, like they need to recognize that it really is an honor to be present for that part of your life. We're not just sharing, a review on, some restaurant in the city. I'm bearing my soul. These are my emotions. This impacts my everyday. And as much as you feel, this little chapter may influence, like how you go forward and think, like this is still my life, right? I still go home to my family, and all the things happen. And I'm glad to share those stories with researchers and people who are interested. But at the same time, you have to earn the right to listen, because I know when I listen to your stories, I am deeply honored and respectful, because I'm very thankful to hear anything that you have to share, because that's more like, that's a humbling experience. That's where we're all human, and I'm grateful that you're super smart and you can make research studies out of it. But at the same time, like, it's my heart on a plate to you, right? So
And in that case as well too, I think it's important to say, like, for storyteller and for a person who's looking to feature storytelling, no is a complete sentence. Yeah, absolutely. And that needs to be said as well too, in terms of how far you wish to pursue storytelling, what that looks like, what that shouldn't look like, whether or not you do it at all, for that matter as well too. So I wanted to thank everybody for an opportunity to really convey some thoughts so far on this. And there will be a recording that I will post on the Eventbrite that should send directly to your email as well too. Should you wish to share it, it will also be on our YouTube channel for the Family Engagement and Research course. And I look forward to having more conversations in the future when it comes to some of these concepts. And you can also connect with me at my email, which I'm about to post here. And stories are a gift. Storytellers are allowing us to hold a piece of their life, and it is indeed an honor. And thank you all. This is truly, and that, Christina, I think I can't think of a better way to finish this up, is just to say that it really is a spiritual experience. And I think that we need to treat it with the air of respect, essentially, that it deserves as well too, and to not make it feel paternalistic or just to fill a space or an obligation as well too. So thank you again, everybody. Have a wonderful rest of your week, and we'll get the information out to you soon.